Welcome again, Tommy Hansen. You are a Danish, Berlin-based journalist, the founder and host of the Free 21, a very well-read news site, and you have over 150 writers who work for you. It's an honor to have you here in Norway. We are very interested in the type of work you do, because you do something that we hardly see anymore in the West, which is free thinking. That you actually are an advocate for free speech, in the sense that we should be allowed in the West to be told the different worldviews and the different sides to the conflicts and what goes on in the Middle East, in the United States. And now we're talking about the European refugee crisis. Has it been willfully done in order to create unrest and dissatisfaction and ethnic clashes in Europe for somebody rich to benefit from this? Or is that a far stretch?
It is a far stretch, but I wouldn't say it's too far. You could just look at it logically. The US threw 25,000 bombs last year all over the world, mostly in Muslim countries. Whenever such a bomb is being thrown, people are dying, people are getting killed. Families have a hard time, their lives are being destroyed, a lot of hatred, a lot of feelings are being provoked, and it happens every time. So you have to multiply this with 25,000 times only last year. So whenever we in the West try to introduce democracy or whatever we want with bombs, we get two things out of it. One, we get more terrorism, we get more people hating the West, and two, we get more refugees. So for the last, since the war on terror started, this strange war, which is never going to end in 2001, since this war started, we have created millions of refugees, and we know that for sure. So we can't just close our eyes and say, well, we have nothing to do with it, because the refugees are directly consequences of our own acts. So when you do that on a massive scale, when you bomb and bomb and bomb countries like in Yemen, like in Sudan, like in Libya, like wherever we've been for the last years, first of all, you make sure that the cities it will take years and years and years before they get to function again. So we have many years of good work for Western companies rebuilding the cities. That's one part of the game. But you get a lot of people just fleeing because they don't want to get bombed anymore. And when these people are being told, go to Germany, go to Europe, well, they go there. I would go there too. I wouldn't want to live in a country that's been bombed on a regular basis. So we can't blame them at all. You cannot, if you arrange wars on this global scale, like the NATO and the US has been doing, you have to realize that the refugees is the flip side of the coin. The refugees will come, and it's a part of modern warfare to plan these refugees.
But it's such a paradox, one may say, because whenever there is a terror attack on European soil, or in the case of the refugee crisis, the European media all speak about it as though we have not been to the Middle East and destroyed their countries in the first place. If 15, God forbid, people are killed in a London bombing, for example, we see their faces, the young faces, as we saw with Birmingham, the young faces of these people that tragically were killed innocently, obviously. But nobody shows the faces of the millions and for example, the Syria war, the 150,000 killed, the young girls walking up the street there too, being bombed, and how engaged we are in the wars in those countries.
Right. The last example with the London bombings, as you say, it's all over the Western media on exactly the same day. 220 people were killed in Homs when we dropped bombs. 220 people died. In London, I think it was 4 or 5. No matter the figures. But the point is, the news about 220 people dying as a result of our bombs in Homs doesn't get into the mainstream media because we have no room for it. We are all talking about the same thing, and that's what we are doing. That is why you can see obviously that the media are controlled, because it can't be independent decisions on every bloody newspaper resulting in exactly the same headlines. It's way out of line. It's way out of control.
And the same, we saw the second ISIS appeared. I remember it very well because that was the time when the United States didn't quite succeed to use the moderate rebels to take Assad. And then a few months later, all of a sudden, there's an attack from the north, as you remember. Mm-hmm. And on the very same day, this fearful ISIS group came, which basically consisted of around 800, Ba'athist soldiers and some people in Iraq area. All of a sudden, somebody put in billions of dollars, right, and they came riding into Syria from the north, like, and on the same day, all over the world, The Guardian, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, everyone, all the newspapers in Norway, in Denmark, they all had the same story, and we saw these wonderful photographs. And everyone who knows the Middle East and know, Arabs or Syrians or whatever, they are not trained to take photographs in precisely that kind of, artful way. It was Western photographs, sure, done by Western educated people. Sure. Everyone could see it.
Yeah, sure. I know personally. I know a photographer who has been in Aleppo, one of the mainstream photographers. What happens there is the mainstream journalists and photographers are being brought in buses into Aleppo, and then they're being lined up somewhere where they can take dramatic pictures. And that's how all of a sudden these white helmets appear in every bloody picture you see from the mainstream media. And look at the pictures. In every picture you have a white helmet, a logo, and a child that is suffering. If you put in a Coca-Cola instead, you would see this is product placement. And people who has been on the ground in Syria, which no news organization from the West has ever been. No news organization from the West has ever been on the ground in Syria, in Aleppo. Never. They rely on one man, one person sitting in London who has made this human rights institute, and it is one source. So they haven't been there, but people who have been there can tell us this is not Assad fighting against his people. It is Assad and his people fighting against foreign mercenaries being financed by Qatar, by Saudi Arabia, by US, and by the Turks. So it is a lie. The white helmets do not exist. I refer to a very decent Danish photojournalist, Jan Öberg, or he's Swede. He was there for 10 days. And he walks around without control. He says he has not been able to find one person who has ever seen the white helmets. Not one. Mm-hmm. The Syrian Red Half Moon, this organization, health organization, has heard of them but never seen them. So something is really, really rotten here. It can't be true. I have seen one of the videos newly posted by the so-called white helmets, where they say they are performing life-saving things on 2 babies, 2 small children. I don't know if you've seen the video, but it's really extreme. But I've shown this video to 2 independent, 30-year experienced heart neurologists. And they both said, within very few seconds, I'm sorry to say so, they both said, those children are already dead. They are playing with dead corpses. They are not saving lives. It is dead babies that they've put on video, and because of that, they got this alternative Nobel Peace Prize.
We reported this in the Herland Report. I think it was back in March. And then when you saw the report from the Swedish Doctors for Human Rights, and I had also Norwegian doctors look at that video, and they say the same thing. They said if they're not killing them, that if they were not dead before they put them on, they were killing them with the way they were swirling around that. And this was a white helmet video, and I mean it's horrible, the degree.
But how come that we need doctors and normal observers to tell us that we are being lied to? How come that no one in the mainstream media has questioned this video just once? How come? I really don't. But I've stopped wondering. I'm just doing it my way now. We are making journalism as we think it should be made, and we address such issues.
Yes, and this was also what happened in Libya. I've looked very closely into that, and I come out with a book on Libya and the different wars, actually coming out quite soon, early 2018. And when you study that theme, when you look at, this was what Muammar Gaddafi was saying, these are not, I mean, he was one of the most sworn enemies of the Al-Qaeda in that region. He spoke up against them. He said they are not coming with the correct form of Islam. Islam was never to kill yourself. Islam is not to kill other Muslims. Look what they're doing, creating the... So he was really one of their worst enemies. And he said once which later proved to be completely undocumented, that he was attacking his own people. This has long ago now been clear that that was not the case at all. Then he clearly stated that there are foreign mercenaries on Libyan soil. Later it turned out to be hundreds and hundreds of Qatari soldiers, and they're also saying that the people that killed Muammar Gaddafi in those scenes we've all seen, which Hillary Clinton laughed at when she heard about his death. She laughed and apparently found it so funny. These people around him were Qatari soldiers dressed as regular people in Libya. And we've never seen the millions and millions that marched, I think it was July 1st, 2011, pro-Muammar Gaddafi. We never saw it in our media, but we only heard the rebel stories.
Yeah, well, that goes for Ukraine as well. That goes for every country where we have a regime change, or have had a regime change for the last decades, for many years. We must. I do not understand why, but we have to understand that it is so. The U.S. has a need to install governments in all over the world who want the same things as the U.S. want, and they do it with every mean they have. There's a very explosive book of John Perkins. It's called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And there you have it laid out very clearly that the US has 3 steps in its foreign policy. Step 1, we offer huge credits with money out of thin air, money that doesn't exist, and we give them to some South American country, for instance. Normally this government then says, yeah, great, give us the money and we can all drive around in Rolls and have a great life. And the rest of the money is being used that American companies can make infrastructures and harbors and whatever in the country, which the country doesn't need. So now the country is in deep debt and needs to pay back. So we have them exactly where we want them. Normally, the step 1 is enough. But if that doesn't work, says John Perkins, then step 2, then we put in the jackals, the people with rifles, the people actually killing people, assassins. That's step 2, and normally that works. But if they're really stubborn and that doesn't stop them anyway, then we send the military. So the United States starts with ties and suits, and everybody knows if it doesn't go as planned, we just put in the military. And then you can just look at the history of how many invasions the US has been made for just since World War II. How many illegal wars? I mean, technically, it's illegal to attack another country, but that's what we've been doing systematically. 13 times since '93, NATO and the US has been engaged in illegal wars, and no one questions it anymore.
It's such a serious situation, and also interesting with such a a country like Afghanistan. I mean, the Americans obviously went in right after 9/11 to look for bin Laden. Apparently he was in a cave somewhere there hiding. And now we're how many years later? 15 years, 14, 15, and they're still looking for, I mean, Osama bin Laden, or is he dead, or where is he? I mean, nobody knows, but they're still there. And I've read also how the year, because the Taliban didn't allow the growing of the poppies, the same year the Americans came in and did that invasion, the poppy growing went skyrocketing high. And we all know Afghanistan now, I think 90% of the heroin trade transported through Kosovo, I do believe, or Kosovo or Ukraine.
95%, according to UN, comes from Afghanistan. Some of it goes through Russia, and some of it goes through Kosovo and then to Europe. Yeah, that's right. We need to understand that the poppy fields, the heroin in or the opium in Afghanistan, it's not only for heroin, it's also for the Western medical pharmaceutical industry. So when the Taliban in 2000 burned all the fields, the whole Western medical industry ran out of supplies. They couldn't make their morphine anymore. So they had a huge problem. So really, really huge capital interests were urging that we took some action at that point. And everybody knows that the CIA has been thriving off illegal, earning money illegally through drugs and weapons, and they've been doing so in order to avoid taking things to Congress. They can make their own wars, finance them by drug smuggling, and they've been doing so ever since before the Iran-Contra affair. It's been part of the official story. The CIA, meaning also the Clinton family, is responsible for the crack wave in the US in the 80s. It's totally out in the open. It comes from the CIA. So my point is, both the CIA and the big capital needed the poppy fields in Afghanistan to become operative again, and that happened at the same moment that we came in. There are numerous pictures where NATO soldiers are guarding poppy fields, and that's not...
I've seen them.
Yeah, and that's not officially, that's not for heroin, of course it's not. Officially it is for the Western medical industry. But among the farmers, there are people, of course there are, like all over, who sells it through the back door to people making heroin out of it. And that's when I start to wonder again, because how come we can find a terrorist on the other side of the planet in some mountain, cave or whatever, but we can't find the laboratories who make this opium into heroin? We can't find the transports. We're talking about tons and tons of it's not being transported on the back of a donkey. It's a huge logistical operation, and the secret services of the Western societies have to know about it. It is not possible to do a thing like that on such a scale without knowledge.
It's quite remarkable to take a look at the American society as well, and to see the spread of drugs really among regular users. I mean, now for the past 10 years, it's amazing the degree of drugs abused in the United States by youngsters. And they say in the US Army as well that 70% of all the people who apply may not enter due to a history of drug abuse or convictions. So it's like a flood and a venom also into the American system, poisoning a whole generation with these drugs.
It surely is, and it goes for Europe too. That's the flip side of the coin, but it goes to show that the people planning this, they have no ethics, they have no morale. It is about generating money enough that the CIA can have its own jurisdiction, which it has and has had for years. And as soon as one of these sources dry out or someone is threatening it, they have to take action. I mean, Gaddafi was about to make a new currency, wasn't he, based on gold? That was a threat to the American Federal Reserve System, so he had to go. Saddam Hussein was about to sell his oil for euro instead of dollar. That's a threat to the machine, so he had to go. And every bloody time there's a reaction. But the good part of the story is it's not only Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi and others who are against the system. I can tell you that in the top financial world is a huge resistance, and systems are being prepared to take over when this system collapses, when the dollar out of thin air, oil, petrodollar system collapses, and it will. We don't know when, but it will. And when it collapses, if it collapses, it'll be permanent. It'll be all over. We start all over again. So the finance world has had it. People don't want to be controlled by this 1% anymore. Not even so you could say the rich bastards, because by the next crash, even the rich bastards are going to lose their money, and that's why they are preparing alternative systems. I do think we are going to get out of this grip of this. It's ridiculous that we have allowed actually fake money to take over and control our lives, but we have.
It's amazing to see precisely what you're describing too, that we have entered into an authoritarian system, yet being told in the media all the time we're democratic and we respect human rights, yet the very opposite is happening. So it's really time for people to wake up and to read other news sources and to really look through all the illiberal and intolerant propaganda that's being served us by the mainstream media outlets in order to penetrate both what's happening in the Middle East and what are the driving forces behind the European refugee crisis as well. I remember when those 2,500 initial refugees came marching up through Europe chanting Allah Akbar on the way to Germany. Once they arrived in Germany, I have a number of Syrian friends, and they said that a lot of the Syrians were taken in to translate from Arabic, but so many of them didn't even speak Arabic. Others had more black skin, and the people in Syria are lighter in skin than what I am. So they were so surprised, and later there was this survey showing that 1/3 of the 2,500 that came, something like that, came from Albania, and another third from Kosovo, Albania. And at that same time, there were 200,000 on the border to Serbia, remember? And, you know, because, I mean, there is just such a chaos in Kosovo, Albania, and the final third came from Turkey, and a number of those were Syrians. So it's just such a bunch of, you know, lies that come through, and nobody speaks about the problem in Kosovo, Albania, because probably that's where the Americans have their bases. I don't know, but it's really selective reporting from the mainstream.
It is. One thing which I also find very important is one needs to understand that there are dark forces in power. And through history, there has been numerous examples. It is a fact, it's a historical fact, that the CIA infiltrated NATO and created this Operation Gladio, in which they made terror attacks. We do know that one of these groups, the CIA-controlled groups, were behind the terror attack in Bologna in 1980. One of the biggest terror attacks and that time. And so the question is, when the CIA could do it then, could they do it now also? I would say absolutely yes, and I would remind you that Truman, who was one of the founders of the CIA in 1960, he said, if I had known what the CIA would evolve into, I would never have done it. He really felt sorry, and Eisenhower warned against the CIA, against this machine. Kennedy warned against this machine. Since then, no president has warned against the machine. So the question is, has the machine given up? Is the problem solved, or are they still there? And they are still there. And you can just look at the media to see what they're doing. They are there. But it's not only the media. It's very important to understand that almost every think tank that was founded in Europe after World War II, almost every, in research, in education, in culture, whatever, were founded by CIA operatives. The CIA was in every bloody think tank that was founded. And why? Because we were afraid of the communists.
Yes.
So nothing was founded where the CIA was not deeply involved at that time. We just may think that they just then, as I said, gave up and went home, but I think not. And that's the problem also with the whole research, the whole university research. As you know, as you might know, there's one Danish scientist, Niels Harrit, who's been looking critically into 9/11, and he's the only Danish scientist doing so. Scientists who are not mainstream will not be funded, and as journalists they'll lose their jobs. So it is so confusing to look at the world if you look at it through the mirrors of the mainstream media, because they are way out of context. And I don't regard our media as alternative anymore. I'd rather say we are the media, we are journalists. It's the other ones that are alternative, and that's only to find a very nice way of putting it.
Yeah. This is a very serious situation, and thank you very much, Tommy Hansen, founder and host of the Free 21. Follow the page, more than 150 writers he has in his group. Follow this page, and thank you very much for your diligent critical thinking and your critical journalism. Thank you for joining us here at the Herland Report.
Thank you for having me.